I never imagined that the people I loved most could betray me so completely. Not my son, he's innocent, but my daughter-in-law. She had been using me, manipulating me, taking advantage of my love, my trust, and my money for years. I only realized it when it was too late. It started like any other family situation, small requests, little favors. "Can you lend me a few hundred for groceries?" she'd ask, her voice casual, almost sweet. "I'll pay you back next week." And I always said yes, because she's family. That's what you do. You help your family. But soon the favors escalated. Rent, car repairs, even emergencies that weren't emergencies at all. And every time I told myself, it's temporary, she'll be okay, my son deserves this. Then came the day that changed everything. She called me, her tone casual, cheerful even. "We bought a new house," she said. My heart leapt for just a second. Excitement? Pride? Relief that my family was thriving? But then she added the words that hit me like a hammer. "But you're not welcome." I froze. My hands trembled. My chest tightened. Not welcome? After everything I've done for you? I couldn't comprehend it. I wanted to scream, to cry, to shake her until she understood the betrayal she had unleashed. But all I could do was hang up the phone and sit in silence, trying to catch my breath, my mind spinning with anger and disbelief. For years, I had poured everything into helping them: money, energy, love, and hope. Every time my son asked for a small contribution, I gave. Every time she hinted at an emergency, I responded. And now, after all those years, she cast me aside as if I were nothing. My heart ached, not just for myself, but for the son who remained oblivious, or worse, chose to ignore the truth. The following weeks were torture. Every glance at my empty wallet, every unopened bill, every phone call reminding me of another unpaid expense was a reminder of her exploitation. Yet, I still tried to maintain the facade of normalcy, smiling at my son, helping him with little things, pretending that nothing had happened. Inside, I was furious. How could someone I trusted so completely betray me like this? I started noticing small things I had ignored before. The way she avoided eye contact whenever money came up. The way she laughed at my suggestions, dismissing them as trivial. The way she manipulated every situation to her benefit. The realization hit me hard. She had been using me from day one, and I had been blind to it. One night, I went through old bank statements, receipts, and financial records. The numbers made my blood run cold. Thousands of dollars gone. Every piece of furniture in their house, every appliance, every vacation, every small luxury. It had all been funded by me. I had been working my entire life to support them, and they had been taking, without even a shred of gratitude. I tried to confront my son gently, hoping he would understand once I laid everything out. "Do you realize how much I've contributed over the years?" I asked. His eyes flickered briefly, maybe with recognition or guilt, but then he smiled weakly. "You worry too much. We're fine." Fine? That word cut deeper than any insult could. They were thriving because of me, and yet I was being erased. My contributions, my sacrifices, my love, it all meant nothing to them. It was as if I had been invisible, a silent servant, while they built a life on my generosity. Then came the first spark of resolve. I realized that if I wanted justice, I couldn't rely on anyone else. I had to take matters into my own hands. I began documenting everything.
keeping careful records of conversations, transactions, and every moment she manipulated me. I recorded her lies, her subtle guilt trips, her casual brags about my contributions. I needed proof. I needed control. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone with a friend, laughing softly. "She doesn't even realize how much she's given me. It's like she's paying for my lifestyle and she doesn't even know it." Her laughter ignited a fire inside me. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist. I began planning carefully, observing, waiting, recording every detail. Every lie she told, every manipulation she attempted, every piece of her arrogance, each became a tool for the day I would reclaim my dignity. The tension built with every passing day. I watched, I listened, I took note. The more audacious she became, the easier it was to spot her flaws, her overconfidence. She assumed I was weak, compliant, too kind to fight back. She was wrong, dead wrong. I started small, subtle confrontations, leading questions, hints of my knowledge. Each time I gauged her reaction, noted her defenses. I learned her patterns, her manipulations, the way she hid her greed behind charm. Slowly, I began to see the full picture, the scale of exploitation, the depth of betrayal, and the audacity of her actions. And deep down, I knew the moment would come when I could no longer wait, when I would confront her fully, expose the truth, and reclaim my life. She had assumed she could erase me, but she had underestimated one thing. I would not be silenced. I would not be erased. And she would pay, not in anger or revenge, but in the cold, undeniable truth of her exploitation. Little did she know, the woman she thought she could manipulate forever was already plotting her downfall. And this was just the beginning. Every morning, I woke up pretending everything was normal. I smiled at my son, brewed his coffee just the way he liked it, reminded him of errands, cooked meals, and tidied the house.
On the surface, life looked ordinary, but inside, I was constantly calculating, analyzing, observing. Every interaction with her felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of betrayal. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It never had been. It was about the constant manipulation, the subtle control she had over our family, the way she had turned generosity into a weapon. Every time I offered help, she accepted it as her right, never with gratitude. Every gesture of kindness I made, she twisted into proof that I was easy to manipulate. I started noticing the little things I had ignored before. How she always asked for money at the most inconvenient times, in ways that made me feel guilty for saying no. How she would forget to mention that my contributions were funding luxuries I could never afford. How she would casually mention a problem, and by the next day, I'd find out she had solved it using my money, but without acknowledging it. One evening, I caught her flipping through a furniture catalog, pointing out items for her new house, while casually mentioning, "Oh, this would be perfect, but maybe it's too expensive." My stomach sank. I knew exactly how expensive it was because I had been paying for things like this all along. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I didn't. I had learned over the years that confrontation too early only gave her a chance to gaslight me. Instead, I watched. I observed her interactions, her small lies, the way she maneuvered conversations to avoid accountability. I began keeping a mental record of every expense, every manipulation. It became a game of cat and mouse, except she didn't know I was the cat and that I was learning fast. One afternoon, my son asked me for help transferring money for a house emergency. I hesitated, but my voice betrayed nothing. "Is it really necessary?" I asked calmly, carefully. He said, "It's just a small thing. We'll pay you back soon, promise." I nodded. But later that evening, I discovered it had gone toward a luxury spa day she had booked with friends, an expense I hadn't authorized or expected. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my empty bank account and the confirmation email, feeling a mix of rage and disbelief.
This wasn't an emergency. This was manipulation. This was taking advantage of trust, love, and a blind parent's devotion. The more I saw, the clearer it became. She had been calculating, strategic, and deliberate. Every time she asked for help, she knew exactly how far she could push. Every small favor had been a test of my patience, a measure of my limits. And every time I gave, she grew bolder. But while her arrogance grew, so did my resolve. I started to plan small, calculated maneuvers. I didn't confront her outright yet. I couldn't afford to. I needed leverage. I began tracking her patterns, when she spent money, when she called me, when she tried to manipulate my son. I created a detailed record of everything. It was tedious, exhausting, and emotionally draining, but necessary. At night, I would lie awake, thinking through scenarios. What would I say when I confronted her? How would I expose the truth without destroying my relationship with my son for what she claimed was a car repair emergency? The next day, she invited me over for tea. I walked into their living room, expecting to see a fixed car in the driveway, or at least some acknowledgement. Instead, I saw her new designer handbag, the one I had effectively paid for. I froze. I didn't say anything. She smiled, completely unaware of what I knew, and said casually, "Thanks for helping with the car. It worked out perfectly." My hands tightened around my cup. Every nerve in my body screamed to lash out, to demand answers, to make her see the betrayal in front of her own eyes. But I stayed calm. I smiled, nodded, and left. That was the first time I realized that restraint would be my weapon. Patience would give me power. She might have money, charm, and manipulation, but I had knowledge, observation, and strategy, and I intended to use every ounce of it. Days passed, each one filled with small tests, a request here, a subtle guilt trip there, a casual mention of another luxury she had purchased. Each time, I documented, logged, analyzed. Every interaction added to a growing picture of deception. Every transaction, every lie, every manipulation became a thread in the web she had spun around me. I also began noting patterns in her behavior. When she thought I was naive, she would let her guard down. When she thought I was weak, she would flaunt her victories. I started to predict her actions, to anticipate the lies before they were spoken. And with each correct prediction, my confidence grew. But she wasn't stupid. She was cunning, intuitive, and skilled at reading people. There were moments when I felt the weight of every manipulation bearing down on me, when I doubted my ability to outsmart her. Yet those moments were fleeting. I reminded myself why I was doing this: for justice, for dignity, for the recognition I deserved. And then, one afternoon, the ultimate twist. I found a small receipt tucked under a stack of papers, something she had clearly tried to hide. It was for a weekend getaway with friends, luxuries funded entirely by me. The discovery confirmed it. She had been lying to my face for years, spending my money on indulgences while pretending every request was an emergency. I felt a surge of both anger and exhilaration. This was the proof I needed, the first piece of the puzzle that would allow me to reclaim control. I smiled to myself, a quiet, satisfied smile. She had underestimated me. She had assumed I was weak, but now I had the beginning of the leverage I would need. From that day, I became vigilant. Every call, every text, every casual remark was analyzed, logged, and stored in my mental and written records. Every small victory she thought she had gained over me was secretly fueling the strategy that would eventually topple her. And little did she know, the more she flaunted her victories, the closer she brought herself to the ultimate confrontation. Every lie, every manipulation, every betrayal, each one was now a stepping stone leading to the day when the truth would finally surface, and she would have no choice but to face the consequences of her actions. After discovering that hidden receipt, something inside me shifted. I could no longer ignore the magnitude of her betrayal. It wasn't just small luxuries or casual manipulation. It was a full-scale exploitation of my trust and generosity, carefully hidden behind charm and deceit. Every emergency I had responded to, every favor I had granted, had been calculated to keep me compliant, unaware, and entirely at her mercy. I remember that night vividly. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of old receipts, bank statements, and notes I had started keeping in secret. My hands shook, my chest ached, and yet there was a sense of exhilaration. Finally, clarity. Finally, the pieces of the puzzle were coming together. I began a methodical investigation. I went through every transaction I had ever made for them. Rent payments, car repairs, groceries, gifts, vacations. Slowly, horrifyingly, a pattern emerged. Every few weeks, she would extract more money under some pretense. Every small favor was a carefully constructed lie, and always she would make me feel like I was the one being unreasonable if I questioned her. I remember one particular afternoon when I confronted the numbers aloud to myself. So for the past 3 years, all of this, it's been me funding your lifestyle, I muttered, staring at a spreadsheet that detailed thousands of dollars flowing from my account directly into hers. I couldn't believe how blind I had been. I had trusted her, believed in her, even defended her to friends and family, and she had taken every ounce of that trust and turned it into profit. But anger alone wouldn't be enough. I realized that confronting her blindly would only make her defensive, crafty, and even more deceptive. I needed leverage. I needed proof, undeniable evidence that I could use when the time came. So I expanded my investigation. I started secretly recording conversations whenever she requested money or made casual remarks about purchases. I documented patterns in her spending, cross-referenced them with my bank records, and created a detailed timeline of her manipulations. Each day, my understanding of her methods deepened. She wasn't sloppy. She was meticulous. She knew exactly how far she could push me without raising suspicion. She was skilled at deflection, at spinning stories, at gaslighting. But every small lie, every attempt to hide the truth left a trail, and I was following it meticulously. One evening, I overheard her laughing with friends on the phone. "She doesn't even realize how much she's doing for me," she said, casually flaunting my generosity. "It's like she's paying for my lifestyle, and she has no idea." Her laughter made my stomach twist, but it also solidified my resolve. I could see it now, clearly. I was not weak, I was not blind, and she had underestimated me. Every laugh, every casual remark, every manipulative move was a thread I could pull to unravel her carefully constructed life. The more I observed, the more I planned. I started thinking strategically, like a chess player. Every conversation was an opportunity. Every request she made was a potential trap I could use against her. I began to anticipate her moves, predict her lies, and document her manipulations with increasing precision. But there was one problem. My son. He remained blissfully unaware, or perhaps unwilling to see, the depth of her deceit. I had to be careful. I couldn't risk alienating him. Any confrontation had to be flawless, undeniable, and timed perfectly. One wrong word, one premature accusation, and she would turn him against me. So I played a delicate game of observation and preparation. I kept my voice calm, my demeanor polite, my questions seemingly casual. But inside, I was calculating every word, every gesture, every interaction. I was building a case, one that she would never see coming. Then came another discovery that shocked me. I found an email confirmation for a luxury weekend getaway, another indulgence paid entirely by me, under the guise of helping with household expenses. I stared at the confirmation number, the total cost, the dates. My blood ran cold. She had been lying to my face for years. Every request, every manipulation, every casual remark about money, it was all a carefully orchestrated scheme. I felt a surge of both anger and empowerment. Finally, I had concrete proof. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. The evidence was undeniable. And with this, I could begin the process of reclaiming what had been stolen from me. Not just my money, but my dignity, my trust, my place in my family. Every phone call, every text, every casual remark from her was scrutinized, documented, and stored. I cross-checked dates, amounts, and statements. I noted every contradiction, every lie, every manipulation. And as I did, a sense of control replaced my fear. For the first time in years, I felt empowered. I began to test her, subtly. Small questions, casual remarks, hints that I knew more than I let on. Her reactions were priceless. A flicker of surprise, a slight hesitation, a carefully hidden smirk that quickly vanished. She had assumed I was compliant, unaware, and gullible. She was discovering, slowly, that I was neither. The tension built with each passing day. I was no longer simply a victim of manipulation. I was a strategist, a planner, a silent observer gathering every piece of evidence, every clue, every detail. And little by little, I began to see the path toward justice, not revenge, but the reclamation of everything she had taken from me. And yet, despite the growing evidence and my meticulous planning, a small part of me worried. What if she discovered my strategy? What if she turned my son against me before I had the chance to act? But I pushed those fears aside. I reminded myself that patience, careful timing, and undeniable evidence would be my weapons. She had underestimated me for years. That mistake would be her downfall. As I prepared for the day when I would confront her, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. Fear because betrayal is always personal, and the emotional wounds cut deep. Exhilaration because I finally had clarity, control, and a plan. The scales were shifting, and soon she would discover that the person she had manipulated for so long was no longer powerless. And so I waited, observing, recording, documenting, and preparing. Every lie she told, every manipulation she attempted, every indulgence she secretly funded with my resources, it was all part of the story I was piecing together. And one day, the truth would come crashing down around her, leaving her no choice but to face the consequences of her actions. Little did she know, the web of deceit she had spun around me for years was about to unravel, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same. I could no longer hold back. Every day of manipulation, every lie, every betrayal had been etched into my memory, and my patience was wearing thin. I decided it was time to confront them, not recklessly, but carefully, armed with the evidence I had collected. The evening was quiet, almost deceptively peaceful. My son had just returned from work, tired but smiling, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I called him into the living room, trying to keep my voice calm, my demeanor neutral. "Can we talk for a moment?" I asked. He nodded, a trace of concern flickering across his face. I took a deep breath. "I've been going through the finances and I've realized something concerning." My son's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't speak. I continued. "Over the years, I've helped with expenses, covered emergencies, lent money when it was needed. But now, I see that much of what I've given has been used for things I didn't agree to, things I wasn't even aware of." His brow furrowed. I don't understand," he said. "I thought we were all helping each other." I felt a flash of frustration. Helping each other? This isn't helping, this is exploitation. I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice steady but firm. It's not helping, son. It's manipulation. Your wife has been taking advantage of my trust, my generosity, and before I could finish, she entered the room. Calm, composed, the picture of innocence. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone light, almost casual. But I noticed the faint tension in her posture, the way her eyes flicked toward my laptop on the table, where my meticulously organized evidence lay. "I was just explaining," I said, keeping my voice measured, "that over the years, I've realized how much I've contributed financially and emotionally, and that some of it may have been misused." Her eyes narrowed slightly, just enough to make me pause. Then she smiled, a practiced, polished smile, and said, "I think you're misunderstanding things. I've never done anything wrong. You've always helped willingly. Maybe you're reading too much into it." Classic gaslighting, I thought. She's deflecting, spinning the story, trying to make me doubt myself. But I had anticipated this. I didn't flinch. I simply reached for my laptop, opening the spreadsheet and documents I had prepared over months. "Here," I said, pointing to the detailed records. Every transaction, every expense, every time money I gave was used for luxuries, vacations, or items I never agreed to cover. Look at the dates, the amounts. You can't deny this. Her composure faltered for the briefest moment, a flicker of panic in her eyes. But then she recovered instantly. "Those are just numbers," she said smoothly. "They don't tell the whole story. You're reading it wrong. Maybe you're overreacting." I could feel my blood boil. She was trying to twist reality, to turn me into the unreasonable one. But I remained calm. I had anticipated her tactics, and I had proof. "No," I said firmly. "The story is clear. You've used my trust to fund your lifestyle while pretending it was all justified. And now, you've told me I'm not welcome in your new home. After everything I've done, you dismiss me entirely."
My son looked stunned. That's not true," he said, his voice shaking. "I mean, she wouldn't. She would," I interrupted, my voice steady but sharp. "And she did. Every small favor, every emergency, every excuse you accepted without question, it was all part of her plan to take advantage of me. And now the evidence proves it." For a few moments, silence hung heavy in the room. The tension was suffocating. Then, the twist I hadn't anticipated, but had secretly hoped for, occurred. My daughter-in-law's expression changed, a shadow of panic passing over her carefully maintained facade. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for her phone. You can't." But I was ready. I calmly closed the laptop, keeping all the evidence safe, while her panic grew more visible. She had underestimated me completely. Every move she had made, every manipulation she had planned, was now crumbling under the weight of truth. "I can," I said quietly, deliberately, letting the power in my words sink in. "And I will if I have to. But you have a choice, to admit the truth or continue lying. Either way, the facts are undeniable." Her eyes darted between my son and me, desperation creeping into her voice. "It's not like that. It's never been like that," she cried, trying to regain control. But the cracks in her armor were visible now, faint but undeniable. My son looked back and forth between us, confused, hurt, torn. I could see the realization slowly dawning. Perhaps for the first time, he was beginning to grasp the depth of her deceit. But he was still hesitant, still trying to reconcile the woman he loved with the betrayal that now lay exposed. I took a deep breath. "You've had years to manipulate, to twist reality, to make me seem unreasonable. But the truth doesn't change. Your lies don't erase the facts. And now you have no way to hide them anymore." Her face turned pale. I didn't mean." "You didn't mean," I interrupted sharply. "Do you think that excuses everything?
All the money, all the manipulation, all the emotional betrayal. Tears welled in my eyes, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming mix of anger, frustration, and the raw truth of years spent being exploited. You took everything I gave willingly, and now you tell me I have no place in your life? That ends today. Her shoulders slumped slightly. The facade was slipping. And that was when I realized something crucial. This confrontation was only the beginning. She would fight, deny, manipulate. But with the evidence in hand, I had the upper hand. And soon, she would understand that no amount of charm or deceit could undo the truth I had uncovered.
For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control. The fear, the doubt, the uncertainty that had plagued me for so long began to fade. I wasn't just exposing her lies, I was reclaiming my power, my dignity, my rightful place in my own family. And as she stumbled, struggling to find words, I knew that the first major twist in this story had been revealed. The woman who thought she could manipulate me forever had finally met someone who could outsmart her. And the battle for justice, for truth, and for respect had only just begun. After the confrontation, the tension in the house didn't vanish. It thickened, lingering like a storm cloud ready to burst. I could feel her calculating, scheming even, trying to regain control. But I had tasted the first victory, the subtle crack in her armor, the moment she realized I wasn't blind, and I wasn't stopping here. I knew I had to act carefully. Direct confrontation could backfire. I couldn't risk pushing my son further into confusion or giving her an opening to spin the story. Patience was my weapon now. Observation, timing, strategy. These were my tools. I began with small, deliberate maneuvers, subtle suggestions in conversation, hints that I knew more than I let on, a casual mention of receipts, a passing reference to unexpected expenses, a soft remark about overlooked payments. Each time, I watched her reaction closely, noting every twitch, every flicker of panic, every forced smile. She began to misstep almost immediately. In her attempts to maintain control, she started over-explaining, providing unnecessary details, contradicting herself. Every word, every slip became evidence in my mind, a breadcrumb I could follow to unravel the full story. One afternoon, she asked for help again, claiming it was urgent. My first instinct was to refuse outright, but I didn't. Instead, I agreed, with conditions. "I can help," I said calmly, "but I need all the receipts, details of expenses, and proof of payments." Her face tightened for a fraction of a second. She hesitated, searching for a lie, for a way to redirect the conversation, but I held my ground, steady and unwavering. She finally muttered, "Fine, you'll have it later," and hurried out of the room, leaving me smiling quietly to myself, the first real indication that I was gaining control. I spent the following days going through the documents she reluctantly provided. Predictably, discrepancies emerged. Missing receipts, unexplained transfers, inflated amounts. Each discovery fueled my resolve. Each inconsistency was another step toward full exposure. I wasn't just gathering proof, I was building a timeline, a narrative that would be undeniable. But it wasn't just about documents. I also observed her behavior, her interactions with friends, neighbors, even casual acquaintances. She boasted casually about what she received from me, bragged about luxuries, flaunted what she thought I had unknowingly funded. Every boast, every careless remark added fuel to the plan I was forming. I began planting subtle seeds, small psychological nudges designed to unbalance her further. A question here, a casual reminder there. Hints that I was aware of every indulgence, every deception. She started second-guessing herself. She hesitated more, over-explained more, and for the first time, I sensed genuine fear beneath her polished exterior. Meanwhile, I took measures to protect my son. He remained partially blind to the manipulation, but I couldn't allow her to sway him further. I started documenting interactions with him too, subtly ensuring that when the moment of exposure arrived, he would see the truth plainly, without room for doubt. The minor victories were empowering.
A canceled outing, a delayed purchase, a reluctant admission of an expense. I collected them all. Each small success was proof that my patience, my strategy, was working. She might have had confidence in the past, but now it was eroding, bit by bit. One evening, I decided to escalate slightly. I casually mentioned a recent oversight in a previous expense, pretending to stumble across it. Her reaction was immediate. A brief flicker of panic, a nervous laugh, a tiny slip of the tongue. She tried to recover, but the damage was done. That tiny misstep gave me leverage, a subtle yet powerful shift in the balance of control. It was exhilarating, but I reminded myself to remain cautious. Each step had to be deliberate. I couldn't rush, couldn't let emotion dictate action. This wasn't about immediate revenge. It was about precision, about ensuring that when the final confrontation came, it would be absolute, undeniable, and final. The weeks passed, each day a careful game of strategy. I continued documenting, observing, testing her reactions. I noted patterns, how she redirected blame, how she manipulated emotions, how she twisted facts, and I used those patterns against her, subtly, planting seeds of doubt, creating small cracks in her facade. Then came a significant discovery. I stumbled upon a hidden folder of bank statements she had accidentally left open on the shared computer. A detailed record of her personal expenditures, lavish trips, and undisclosed purchases. I felt a rush of triumph. This was more than evidence. It was the blueprint of her manipulations. Every lie she had told, every moment she had taken advantage of my trust, was recorded there. I spent hours cross-referencing these statements with my records. The discrepancies were staggering. Luxuries, gifts, vacations, all funded by my money, hidden carefully behind fabricated emergencies. I realized that the full extent of her deception was even greater than I had imagined. With this knowledge, I began to formulate the ultimate plan. Minor victories and subtle manipulations had set the stage. The foundation of evidence was solid, and soon I would be ready to confront her with undeniable proof, to reveal her lies in full, to reclaim my dignity and my place in my family. Even as I planned, she remained unaware of the depth of my strategy. She continued to act as if she held all the power, as if I were still the compliant, unaware parent she had exploited for years. But that illusion was fragile, and I could feel it beginning to crumble with every small victory, every carefully orchestrated maneuver. And so, I waited, observed, planned. Each day brought me closer to the moment when control would shift completely, when her arrogance and manipulation would collide with the truth, when the person who had underestimated me for so long would finally realize that the game was over, and I held all the pieces. By the end of that month, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer the victim. I was the strategist. I was the observer. And when the final confrontation came, it would be cinematic, undeniable, and unforgettable. She had assumed she was untouchable. Soon, she would learn otherwise. The deeper I delved into her life, the more shocking the discoveries became. It wasn't just the small luxuries, the vacations, the designer bags. She had been hiding far more than I had ever imagined. Documents, secret accounts, unreported expenditures. She had orchestrated a financial labyrinth, all funded by me, all hidden behind a veil of charm and feigned gratitude. One rainy evening, I stumbled upon the motherlode, a hidden drawer in her study that she clearly thought was secure. Inside were receipts, invoices, and even bank statements detailing purchases and trips she had meticulously concealed. As I rifled through the papers, my hands trembling, I realized the scale of her deception. Thousands, no, tens of thousands of dollars. Every single expense was carefully planned, every lie calculated. I could hardly breathe. My mind raced as I traced each transaction back to the source, my account. She had been living a lifestyle I could barely imagine, funded entirely by my hard work and sacrifices. And the worst part, she had done it knowing I trusted her, believing in her as a family member. That night, I lay awake, the rain tapping against the window, my thoughts spinning. I thought about my son, how blind he had been, how I had defended her countless times, how I had dismissed my own doubts. And then I thought about her calculated smile, the ease with which she had manipulated me for years. The anger I felt was sharp and almost paralyzing, but beneath it burned a cold, resolute clarity. The next few days became a delicate game of observation and testing. I wanted to see how far she would go, how reckless her manipulation had made her. And in one conversation with her, I caught her completely off guard. I casually asked, "Do you remember the payment for the vacation last year? The one you said was covered by your savings?" Her eyes flickered, just for a split second, before she smiled nervously. "Oh, that was nothing. Just a small expense. Don't worry about it." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I made a mental note, then later cross-referenced the date and amount with my records. The discrepancy was glaring. She had lied again, and in that moment, I realized something terrifying and exciting. She had grown so confident in her manipulation that she believed I would never notice. Another discovery pushed the story to an entirely new level. I found evidence that she had intentionally misled my son about certain expenses, claiming some were emergencies or necessities, when in reality they funded her indulgences. She had created a web of deception that kept him loyal, kept me compliant, and kept herself insulated. Every family argument, every misunderstanding, every miscommunication was part of her design. I felt a cold satisfaction. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. I wasn't just uncovering her lies, I was uncovering a blueprint, a strategy she had relied upon to maintain control over our family for years. And now, I had it all. But the ultimate betrayal revealed itself in the most unexpected way. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone, speaking with someone I didn't recognize. Her voice was casual, cheerful even, but the words cut me like a knife. "Yeah, everything is going according to plan. She doesn't suspect a thing. The money, the control, it's all mine now. I can't believe how easy this has been." I froze. My heart raced. The audacity of her words was staggering. She hadn't just been taking advantage of me financially, she had been actively plotting to remove me from our family entirely, manipulating my son and ensuring her position of power. The betrayal was total, emotional, financial, and psychological. Every kindness I had shown, every favor I had granted had been weaponized against me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The enormity of what I had uncovered weighed heavily on me. But with the weight came clarity. I wasn't just angry, I was prepared. I had documented every lie, every expense, every manipulation. I had witnesses in the form of receipts, bank statements, and even recordings of conversations. She thought she had built an impregnable fortress, but I had the blueprint to bring it all down. I began preparing for the next phase. I needed to ensure my son saw the truth clearly, without interference. I had to time my actions perfectly, to strike when she least expected it, and when there was no room for her manipulations to succeed. The plan was forming in my mind like a chessboard. Every piece, every move, every potential reaction accounted for. The tension in the house was palpable. She began to sense the shift in power, though she couldn't identify its source. She grew restless, more defensive, constantly over-explaining, providing unnecessary details. Every lie she told now felt heavier, more desperate, as if she instinctively knew her time was limited. One evening, she made a mistake. In an attempt to cover up a minor expense, she contradicted herself in front of my son. I watched closely as confusion flickered across his face. I stayed silent, letting the truth settle in his mind. That contradiction, small though it was the first real crack in her carefully constructed narrative. And I could see that with every passing day, more cracks were forming. I began to realize that she was more vulnerable than she had ever been. Her confidence, her arrogance, her sense of control, it was all an illusion, and I held the key to shatter it completely. I just had to be patient. Timing was everything. By the end of that week, I had compiled everything into a single, undeniable narrative. Every lie, every financial manipulation, every emotional betrayal. I had the evidence, the proof, the recordings, and the documents. And now I just needed the perfect moment. The moment when confrontation would be not just dramatic, but absolute, undeniable, and irreversible. Little did she know, her entire carefully orchestrated plan was on the verge of collapse. Every secret, every hidden expense, every lie she thought was safe was now exposed in my mind, ready to be revealed. And when that day came, she would realize that the person she had underestimated for years had been patiently waiting, quietly planning, and preparing for the ultimate reckoning. The storm was coming. The day had arrived. Months of patience, observation, documentation, and careful planning had all led to this single moment. I could feel the weight of it as I prepared to confront her, not recklessly, but with precision, with undeniable proof, with the calm confidence of someone who had finally reclaimed control. I asked my son to join me in the living room, making sure the atmosphere was neutral, but tense. I didn't give away what was about to happen, but I could see the flicker of curiosity and apprehension in his eyes. She entered, as always, with a carefully crafted smile, unaware of how thoroughly her manipulation had been uncovered. I took a deep breath and began. "We need to talk about everything," I said, my voice calm but firm. "About the money, the favors, the trust that has been abused over the years." Her smile faltered slightly, a subtle crack I had been waiting for. "I don't know what you mean," she said, trying to maintain composure. "Everything has been fine. We're family." I opened my laptop and projected the first piece of evidence, a detailed spreadsheet showing every expense I had made for them over the past years. I spoke slowly, deliberately, letting each word land. "This is every expense I have covered, every loan, every payment, every emergency. And this," I said, pointing to highlighted items, "is how your necessities were actually indulgences, luxuries, and vacations you funded entirely with my resources." Her composure wavered. Her eyes darted to my son, as if silently pleading for support. This isn't accurate," she said, trying to maintain composure. "You're exaggerating." I shook my head, my pulse steady. "No, these are facts. Every document, every receipt, every bank statement confirms it. You have lied for years, taken advantage of my trust, and manipulated our family to maintain control. And now you have nowhere to hide." My son's expression shifted, confusion giving way to shock. He leaned forward, scanning the documents, the receipts, the emails, the meticulously recorded evidence. I don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. I thought she did," I interrupted gently, not with anger, but with clarity. "She has been exploiting both of us. Every favor, every emergency, every request was a calculated step to secure her position, funded by my generosity and your trust." Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time, her mask completely slipped. I didn't mean," she began, but the words sounded hollow, unconvincing even to herself. I had anticipated this. I didn't let her words derail the confrontation. I had prepared carefully, anticipating every excuse, every deflection, every desperate attempt to manipulate the narrative. Intentions don't erase consequences. Your actions speak louder than any excuse you can offer. I showed my son a series of recordings I had made over the months. Conversations where she casually admitted spending money I had given for emergencies on personal indulgences. His eyes widened as he listened, disbelief and hurt mixing in his expression. "All this?" he whispered, barely able to process the scale of deception. "Yes," I said softly, "all of it. And now you can see the truth for yourself."
She tried to interject, to redirect blame, to insist it was a misunderstanding, but the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. Every claim, every defense, every feigned innocence crumbled under the scrutiny of documented reality. The spreadsheets, receipts, bank statements, and recordings left no room for doubt. I continued, presenting proof of the hidden accounts, the secret purchases, the vacations, the indulgences, all funded by my contributions and carefully concealed. Each revelation added to the tension in the room, each exposure a nail in the coffin of her manipulation. Finally, I reached the ultimate piece of evidence, a recording of her conversation planning to isolate me from my son, plotting to ensure I had no influence in the family's financial or personal decisions. She had spoken openly, unaware that I had been listening, documenting, and recording. Her face turned pale. You can't," she began, voice cracking, but no words could save her now. I looked at my son, my heart heavy but resolute. "Do you see now? Everything I've done, every sacrifice, every effort, it was all taken for granted, exploited and used against me, and now you can see the truth." He nodded slowly, disbelief and anger mingling in his eyes. I had no idea," he said, his voice shaking. "I didn't know she—" "You do now," I said firmly, "and it changes everything." She slumped into the chair, finally silent, finally exposed. The control she had wielded for years was gone. The arrogance, the charm, the manipulation, it all crumbled in the face of undeniable truth. I had not just confronted her, I had dismantled the empire of lies she had built using my trust and generosity. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. Not victory in the sense of revenge, but clarity, justice, and dignity restored. I had been patient, careful, strategic, and it had paid off. The person who assumed she could manipulate me forever had underestimated my resolve, my intelligence, and my commitment to truth. And as my son reached out, taking my hand, I knew that the bond of family could survive, could heal, because the lies had been exposed, the betrayal confronted, and the truth finally revealed. Her expression, a mix of fear, shame, and realization, was the last piece of the cinematic moment. She had believed she could erase me from our lives, take everything, and walk away unchallenged, but I had outsmarted her, waited patiently, gathered proof, and orchestrated the confrontation perfectly. The aftermath was surreal. She remained in the house, but the dynamic had shifted irreversibly. She no longer controlled the narrative. She no longer dictated the truth. Every action, every word, every attempt at manipulation would now be met with evidence, scrutiny, and accountability. And as I stood there, looking at the woman who had betrayed me, the son who had finally seen the truth, and the home that had once been a theater of deception, I realized the power of patience, observation, and strategy. I hadn't just exposed a liar. I had reclaimed my dignity, my agency, and my rightful place in my family. The storm had passed, but the calm that followed was profound. Justice had been served, not through anger, but through careful planning, undeniable proof, and unwavering resolve. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of betrayal lift from my shoulders, replaced with clarity, empowerment, and a renewed sense of self. The days after the confrontation were surreal.
The house, once filled with tension and subtle manipulation, now felt quieter, heavier, yet freer. She had no room to maneuver, no lies left unexposed, and no way to regain control. The power she had held over our family for so long had crumbled, and in its place was clarity, truth, and a long overdue sense of justice. My son remained quiet most of the time, processing everything he had learned. I could see the weight on his shoulders, the realization that the woman he trusted had deceived him, that his understanding of our family had been built on lies. And yet, I also saw relief. Relief that the truth was finally visible, undeniable, and absolute. She tried at first to justify herself, to explain her actions, but the words fell flat. Every argument she made had already been countered by evidence, every excuse dismantled by proof. I didn't need to fight. The truth spoke louder than any confrontation could. She was powerless now, forced to acknowledge the consequences of her actions. I spent those days reorganizing our household finances, ensuring that no further manipulation could occur. I implemented checks and balances, making every transaction transparent. It wasn't just about money. It was about security, dignity, and restoring trust. For the first time in years, I felt in control, not just of the finances, but of my life, my agency, and my boundaries. One afternoon, she attempted to approach me, her tone hesitant, almost apologetic. I didn't realize. I stopped her with a calm but firm gesture. I think it's clear now. Actions speak louder than words. Everything is out in the open, and the truth is undeniable. You have to live with the consequences of your choices. Her shoulders slumped, the proud, confident woman I had once known reduced to someone small, uncertain, and trapped by her own deception. She couldn't charm her way out, couldn't twist reality anymore. Every manipulation, every lie, every betrayal was visible, and there was nothing left to hide behind. My son and I began rebuilding our relationship, this time on a foundation of transparency and trust. Conversations that once would have been tinged with tension and suspicion were now honest, open, and constructive. He asked questions, shared his feelings, and began to understand the emotional toll the manipulation had taken on me over the years. And I shared my experiences, carefully explaining without casting blame, helping him see the full extent of her betrayal. We also set boundaries with her, clearly defining what was acceptable and what was not. No more unaccounted-for expenses, no more manipulation, no more lies. The household dynamic shifted dramatically. She remained in the house, but the balance of power had changed completely. Her actions were now transparent, her influence curtailed, and every step she took was under scrutiny. In the weeks that followed, I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't known in years. The years of exploitation, the emotional drain, the financial burden, they were still a part of my history, but they no longer defined my present. I had taken control, reclaimed my dignity, and exposed the deception fully. And in doing so, I had created a safer, more honest environment for my son and myself. There were moments of reflection, too. I thought back to the early days, when I had trusted blindly, when I had defended her to friends and family, when I had questioned my own perceptions. And I realized that those experiences, as painful as they had been, had taught me resilience, patience, and the importance of observation. I had learned to anticipate deception, document carefully, and act strategically. Those skills had brought me to this point, the point where truth and justice prevailed. The final step was closure. I sat down with her one last time, calmly, resolutely. "Everything has been revealed," I said. "The manipulation, the lies, the exploitation. It's done. You have to accept it, live with it, and change your actions moving forward. Anything else is not acceptable." She nodded, defeated, finally recognizing the consequences of her years of deceit. There were no words left, no excuses, no manipulation that could undo the truth. She had been exposed completely, and the balance of power in the family had shifted permanently. I looked at my son, feeling a surge of gratitude and relief. We had weathered the storm together, survived the betrayal, and emerged stronger. The emotional wounds would take time to heal, but the path was clear. We had reclaimed control, dignity, and trust. In the quiet moments that followed, I felt a profound sense of closure. The woman who had once used my generosity and trust against me had no leverage left. The emotional manipulation, the financial exploitation, the gaslighting, they were all behind me. And in their place was truth, empowerment, and a renewed sense of agency. The story that had begun with betrayal and manipulation had ended with justice, exposure, and emotional reclamation. I had been patient, strategic, and unwavering. And now the person who had underestimated me for so long had learned the most important lesson: that no amount of deceit could withstand clarity, evidence, and the resolve of someone determined to reclaim what was theirs. And so, life began to move forward. The household was calmer, boundaries were respected, and honesty was no longer optional. It was necessary. She remained, but the power dynamic was forever altered. I had faced betrayal, endured exploitation, and finally stood tall, fully in control. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from manipulation, free from deception, free from the shadow of exploitation that had loomed over my life. And that freedom, that clarity, that reclamation of dignity was worth every moment of struggle, every ounce of patience, and every carefully planned step that had led to this ultimate resolution. The storm had passed. The deception had been exposed. Justice had been served. And I had finally reclaimed my life.